Arnold Schwarzenegger has always been perceived by the public as a man who managed to achieve success in several areas at once. He was a bodybuilding champion, an iconic Hollywood actor, and then a politician, becoming the governor of California. His career has always been an example of perseverance and self-confidence. However, despite leaving politics, he did not stop monitoring the situation in the country and often commented on what was happening. Unlike many other former Republican governors, he was not afraid to speak out against his fellow party members when he believed that they were doing something wrong. That is why, when Donald Trump took office as president, Schwarzenegger quickly became one of his critics. Their conflict began gradually, like a series of gentle, sweeping blows before the real fight. At first, it was small comments that Schwarzenegger made in interviews, where he noted that the Republican Party should be the party of principles, not blind loyalty to one person. Trump, for his part, barely noticed these attacks. He was focused on running the country, his statements on social media, and his constant sparring with the press. But then something happened that sent their conflict into a new gear. Schwarzenegger has openly denounced the Trump administration's actions on immigration policy. As someone who moved to the United States and built it from scratch, he saw Trump's tough talk as a threat to the very principles that made him an American. He gave a speech urging Republicans to remember that America has always been a land of opportunity, not a country that builds walls. That comment couldn't go unanswered. Trump was not a man to ignore such things. He was not accustomed to criticism, especially from someone in his own party. When Schwarzenegger said Trump was ruining the reputation of Republicans, the president did not remain silent. He responded quickly, in his signature style, using Twitter. His post did not contain complex arguments or political counterarguments. All he wrote was short and sharp. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the worst host on The Apprentice. Sad. The tweet immediately went viral on social media. People were discussing it as if it were another scene from a movie where the two main characters finally confronted each other. Schwarzenegger couldn't help but respond, and his reaction was immediate. He recorded a short video message in which he grinned and said, "Donald, why don't you get back to your job instead of worrying about ratings?" It was said calmly, but the sarcasm was obvious. Thus began this unusual public duel. Both men were known for their charisma and ability to hold an audience. But while Trump used his usual strategy, sharp comments aimed at emotional responses from his supporters, Schwarzenegger responded more measuredly, using irony and experience in speaking to political audiences. After this incident, their conflict reached a new level. Now they regularly exchanged caustic comments, but all this already went beyond the scope of a simple squabble between two celebrities. Many began to see in this a struggle between two directions within the Republican Party. On one side was Trump, a populist who brought millions of new supporters to the party, but at the same time changed its traditional values. On the other side was Schwarzenegger, a man who saw in the Republican ideology, above all, conservatism and loyalty to classical principles. Each new comment only fueled the fire. Schwarzenegger increasingly spoke about how it was time for the Republicans to think about their future and stop being the party of one man. Trump, in turn, ridiculed him, implying that he was simply jealous of his success. But the further the conflict went, the more obvious it became that it was going beyond the usual media show. Political analysts began to discuss what impact this confrontation could have on future elections. Trump, despite his presidency, remained a man who loved to argue and publicly prove his case. His supporters saw nothing wrong with him responding to critics on Twitter, but instead believed that it made him more relatable. Schwarzenegger, for his part, was a figure who appealed to old-school Republicans, those who did not support Trump's aggressive rhetoric but also did not want to switch sides to the Democrats. This conflict was only the beginning of a larger confrontation. The public was watching their every move, and journalists were waiting for the moment when this duel would develop into something more. Both of them were people who were not used to giving in. Their clash promised to become not just a dispute between two public figures, but a real fight for the future of American politics. Trump's tweet, in which he called Schwarzenegger the worst host of The Apprentice, immediately went viral. Social media users were divided into two camps, Some supported the president, and claimed that Arnold really did not cope with the role of host of the show, while others mocked the very fact that the President of the United States was wasting time discussing television ratings. But the most interesting thing happened later, when Schwarzenegger himself responded. Arnold did not engage in lengthy polemics and did not stoop to rudeness. He recorded a short video message in which he said, smiling, "Donald, why don't you get back to your work instead of worrying about ratings?" This video quickly gained millions of views and caused a new wave of discussions. Schwarzenegger spoke confidently. His intonation was calm, but there was a slight mockery in his voice, hinting that he did not take this squabble seriously. The exchange was a sensation. Political analysts immediately began to pick apart the situation. Some argued that Trump had acted recklessly, provoking a conflict with a man who wielded enormous influence in the media. Others, on the contrary, saw this as Trump's usual strategy. When criticism becomes too loud, he switches to another topic, creating a new scandal. And it must be admitted it worked. But Schwarzenegger was no stranger to the media landscape. He knew it wasn't going to end that way. His response was designed to highlight the difference between him and Trump. Arnold was calm, he didn't lose his composure, he looked at a man who can take a punch. Unlike Trump, who often let his emotions rule him, Schwarzenegger acted with coolness and calculation. After this incident, it became clear that the conflict had moved into the public sphere. Journalists asked questions at press conferences, talk show hosts picked up on the topic, memes were created comparing Trump and Schwarzenegger in different roles, one impulsive and emotional, the other confident and unperturbed. A few days after their Twitter spat, Schwarzenegger made another public statement. He gave an interview to a major American TV channel, where he said outright that the Republican Party should reconsider its path. He said that it is impossible to build all politics around one person, that true Republicans have always put the interests of the country above personal ambitions, and that if the party continues to move in the same direction, it could lose its influence for many decades to come. The comment sparked a new round of backlash. Some Republicans who had previously doubted Trump's strategy began to back Schwarzenegger. They argued that the party had indeed changed, that it was now more focused on Trump's personality than on traditional values like free markets, family values, and a strong foreign policy. But of course, most Republicans remained loyal to Trump, believing that his course would only benefit the party. Meanwhile, Trump himself could not simply ignore these statements. He again turned to Twitter, writing that Schwarzenegger is a loser who is simply jealous of his success. He emphasized that it was thanks to him that the Republican Party won the last election, that without him it would be weak and disunited. The response showed that Trump viewed Schwarzenegger's criticism as a serious threat. He understood that Arnold had influence not only in Hollywood but also among more moderate Republicans who were still hesitant about Trump. It was at this point that it became clear that this fight was going beyond a media spat. It was no longer just a verbal duel between two celebrities. It was a fight over the future of the Republican Party. Some experts have even begun to consider the possibility that Schwarzenegger could play an active role in future elections. Although he could not officially run for president because he was born in Austria, his influence could seriously affect the outcome of the leadership struggle within the party. Journalists began to seek the opinions of other prominent Republicans. Some supported Trump, some agreed with Schwarzenegger, but it was obvious that this dispute could no longer be stopped so easily. Society was divided, and in every new interview, in every new commentary, it was felt that this battle would be long. Schwarzenegger knew that if he wanted to make a real difference, he had to keep going. He began giving more interviews, writing columns for major publications, speaking at events where he openly argued that the future of the Republican Party lay not in blind loyalty to one man, but in a return to the principles on which it had been built for decades. Trump, for his part, ratcheted up his rhetoric, increasingly accusing his critics of betraying the party and working for Democrats. He knew that if Republicans began to question his leadership, he could lose his core support. So the conflict between them reached a whole new level. It was no longer just jokes and caustic comments. It became a fight for votes, for people's minds, for the future of the Republicans. Each new day brought new statements, new headlines, new discussions. It seemed that America was witnessing not just a media show, but a real political clash that could affect the entire country. And the most interesting thing was that neither side was going to back down. The standoff between Schwarzenegger and Trump was rapidly gaining momentum. What had started as a series of barbed comments and exchanges of jabs on social media had now turned into a full-blown political rift. This was no longer just a personal conflict between two famous figures. It was about the future of the Republican Party, its ideology, and where it would go in the coming years. Schwarzenegger had no intention of backing down. He saw a party that had once been built on the principles of conservatism, entrepreneurship, and strong international influence gradually transforming into Trump's personal tool. His rhetoric left no room for debate, and the incumbent president's supporters increasingly perceived any criticism as betrayal. But Arnold believed that Republicans needed to return to their roots, to remember that they were not just a movement around one man, but a force that had always stood for reasonable and balanced decisions. Every statement he made was now perceived as a challenge. He spoke on television, wrote columns, and spoke at public events. More and more people, even those who had previously supported Trump, began to think about Schwarzenegger's words. This was especially true among moderate Republicans and independent voters who did not want the party to depend on just one man. Trump, of course, could not ignore this. He always attacked his opponents aggressively, and in the case of Schwarzenegger, he did not mince words. He called him a failed governor, a Hollywood loser, a poser trying to score points in politics. At his rallies, he openly mocked him, calling his words empty and meaningless. But it was becoming clear in political circles that the conflict between them was not just a personal feud, but a struggle for influence. Whereas the Republican Party had once been united, two camps were now beginning to form. One camp was fully behind Trump, seeing him as a strong leader who could challenge the establishment, and was not afraid to tell the truth. The other camp, although not openly opposed to Trump, was beginning to see that his style of governance was too radical and wanted to return the party to a more traditional course. Schwarzenegger spoke at a major political forum attended by many Republican leaders. His speech was aimed not only at Trump, but also at what he has done to the party. He said that America needs leaders who build, not destroy, who lead, not incite hatred. He recalled President Ronald Reagan, his policies, how he managed to unite people, not divide them. The speech sparked a firestorm of reactions. Some Republicans openly said Schwarzenegger was saying the right things. Others accused him of playing into the Democrats' hands by undermining party unity. Trump, upon learning of the speech, immediately responded. He tweeted again, "Schwarzenegger is talking nonsense. He was a weak governor, and now he's trying to advise me? He should get into movies if he still has an audience." The comment immediately went viral online, with some laughing again and others seriously discussing how far this confrontation had gone. But Schwarzenegger wasn't about to respond to more ridicule. He understood that in politics, actions were as important as words. He began to gather supporters around him, urging Republicans to think about the future. He said the party should not depend on one man, that it should be a force that unites, not divides. The conflict continued to gain momentum, turning into a real battle for the minds of voters. It was obvious that neither Trump nor Schwarzenegger were going to back down. Every step, every new statement only inflamed the situation even more. And the further this dispute went, the clearer it became. It would affect all American politics in the coming years. The public began to realize that the conflict between Trump and Schwarzenegger was no longer just a personal squabble. It had moved to the level of an ideological struggle, dividing not only the Republican Party but the entire country. Social networks were seething with discussions, political scientists argued about the possible consequences of this confrontation, and journalists eagerly awaited new statements from both sides. Schwarzenegger continued to make speeches, advocating for a more measured and responsible approach to politics. He did not want the Republicans to become the party of blind loyalty to one man. He had seen how fear of Trump had silenced many of his colleagues, for fear of being ostracized from the ranks of real Republicans. But he would not give in. Increasingly, he spoke of the need for reform within the party, the importance of preserving democratic principles, and the need for Republicans to stop being the tool of one man. Trump, on the other hand, continued to escalate the situation. He spoke to his supporters, presenting Schwarzenegger as a man who had sold out to the liberals and was trying to destroy the party from within. He used his favorite tactics, ridiculing his opponent, making loud statements aimed at mobilizing his supporters, and not giving a single chance for constructive dialogue. His words were simple and clear. Schwarzenegger is a Republican in name only, but in reality he has always been closer to Hollywood and the Democrats. The comment provoked a furious reaction. Some conservatives did believe that Schwarzenegger had too many ties to the liberal elite, and his harsh criticism of Trump was viewed with suspicion. But among moderate Republicans there were more and more people who began to ask themselves, where, in fact, was their party heading? If earlier it had fought for economic freedoms, tax cuts and traditional values, now it increasingly resembled a political cult, in which any disagreement was perceived as betrayal. At a closed Republican meeting, Schwarzenegger met with several influential politicians who, although they did not say so publicly, were also worried about what was happening. Among them were senators, former governors, and even some entrepreneurs who had supported the party for years. They understood that Trump had enormous support, but they also realized that if the situation did not change, the Republicans risked losing the trust of moderate voters and, therefore, future elections. The conversation was tense but constructive. Schwarzenegger urged his colleagues not to be afraid to speak out against what they considered wrong. He said that if the party wanted to be truly strong, it needed leaders who could make informed decisions, not just those who could talk loudly. But even in that room, Trump's influence was palpable. Many remained silent, aware that speaking out too harshly against him could cost them their careers. Soon after this meeting, leaks began to appear in the press about a split brewing within the Republican Party. Journalists reported that a group of moderate Republicans was seriously discussing the possibility of distancing themselves from Trump and creating a new movement within the party focused on traditional conservative values. This news caused a storm of emotions. Some believed that this was the only chance to return the Republicans to their roots, while others saw it as a betrayal. Trump didn't take long to respond. He made another loud statement, calling Schwarzenegger and all those who support him traitors to the party. He said that true Republicans know who their leader is, and those who are trying to split the party are simply working for the Democrats. This speech garnered thousands of positive comments on social media, and his supporters became even more aggressive towards any attempts to criticize him. Schwarzenegger, meanwhile, continued his campaign. He knew he was up against a man who could manipulate public opinion and use populist methods, but he also knew his job was not just to win the argument, but to offer an alternative. He met with young activists, entrepreneurs, people who believed in reasonable conservatism. He said that politics should not be based on fear of one person, but should be aimed at the real development of the country. The situation was heating up. Now no one could just stand aside. The political elite, the media, and ordinary citizens were forced to choose whose side they were on. For some, it was a choice in favor of stability, albeit with certain sacrifices, and for others, a chance to change the situation. There was only one thing left to decide: who would emerge stronger in this confrontation, and what would be the future of the Republican Party. The confrontation between Schwarzenegger and Trump had reached a boiling point. It was no longer just a war of words, no longer an exchange of barbs on social media or television. It had become a real political struggle, which decided which path the Republican Party would choose and what future awaited it. Social networks and news portals were bursting with discussions. Every new comment, every statement instantly went viral. Trump continued to make tough statements, accusing Schwarzenegger of betrayal, calling him a weak and meaningless politician who never had any real influence. Schwarzenegger, in turn, did not enter into direct polemics. He focused on the heart of the matter, reminding people that Republicans have always been a part of reasonable decisions, not blindly following one person. Everyone knew that the main arena for this conflict would be the upcoming Republican National Convention. It was a major event, where key policy issues were traditionally discussed and strategies for future elections were developed. This year, it promised to be more than just another meeting of party leaders. It was a clash of two visions of the future. All the important Republican figures came to the conference. Some openly supported Trump, some sympathized with Schwarzenegger, but most prefer wait, watching the proceedings and assessing who would emerge victorious from this battle. Journalists occupied the building, broadcasting live every detail, every statement, every move of the key players. Schwarzenegger was one of the last to speak. When he took the stage, the room fell silent. He knew his words would be parsed, that his speech would either inspire or destroy his chances to influence the future of the party. He stood before thousands of people, including his supporters and his opponents. "I didn't come here to fight with anyone personally. Not to argue or sort things out. I came here because I care about where the party I've been a part of my whole life is going," he began. His voice sounded firmly, but calmly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to play on emotions, but every word he said hit the mark. "We have always been a party of strong, smart, forward-thinking people. We have never been a party of one man. We built America, created jobs, strengthened the economy, defended our principles. But what is happening now? Now it has come down to who shouts the loudest and who responds the harshest to criticism. We are told that if you do not support one man, then you are a traitor. We are told that only one way is right. But when in the history of America has anything good been born out of fear?" A tense silence fell over the room. No one interrupted. Even Trump's most ardent supporters listened. The Republican Party is more than one person. We are ideas, we are the future. We must not give up ourselves for someone else's ambitions. If we really want to be strong, we must remain true to ourselves and to our voters. He didn't mention Trump by name, but it was obvious to everyone who these words were directed at. When he finished, the room froze for a moment. And then it began something unexpected. In different parts of the hall, people started to get up. First a few people, then dozens, then hundreds. They applauded. It wasn't an enthusiastic, emotional response. It was quiet, conscious support. People understood what they had just heard. Something important that someone finally said what many were afraid to say out loud. But among those gathered there were also those who did clap. They sat with stony faces, showing no emotion. Some were clearly angry, some looked away, some were simply silent, realizing that this speech meant a split. After Schwarzenegger's speech, there was some backstage commotion, heated discussions. Some delegates said he was right and that Republicans needed to think about what they were doing. Others, on the contrary, said he was trying to destroy the party, that he wanted to split it and weaken it. When Trump realized what had happened, he immediately wrote on Twitter, "Schwarzenegger is a traitor. He works for the Democrats. He wants to destroy the Republicans. He will not succeed." The tweet received thousands of likes and comments, but after Schwarzenegger's speech, many no longer looked at these words the same way as before. If before any statement by Trump was perceived as the absolute truth, now people have begun out. The conference ended, but the country was already different. The divisions within the Republicans became obvious. Some continued to blindly follow Trump, considering him the only leader. Others began to look for an alternative, realizing that the party cannot depend on just one person. Schwarzenegger knew his path would be difficult. He understood what lay ahead. There's still a long way to go, but he also knew what he did the first important step. That day, a new political era began. And no one knew how it would end.